So let me clear our current poll, and if you can respond to this poll now, give our presenter an idea of where you're participating from. Okay, I'll publish those up to the whiteboard so everybody got an idea, and our presenter will have an idea of our audience today. We do have people as far west as our Mountain Time Zone, or actually the Pacific Time Zone, excuse me, as well as here in the Central Time Zone and Eastern Time Zone. I do appreciate everybody's participation. Next up, let me clear this poll, and you can start again. Give our presenter an idea of the type of audience he's speaking to. Joan and Dave, if you could, Dave Apsley and Joan Spence, Les Hunter, the response to the poll is by clicking on the button right below your name in the participant window. It's the fourth button from the left, and it has a little A in it. So if you could click on that, I'd appreciate it. Okay, it looks like most people are going to respond. Have responded to this poll, so I will publish those results up. And we have a good mix of audience, everything from landowners to private natural resource professionals, as well as government agency professionals. Appreciate everybody participating today in the polls. Let me touch base real quick on, as far as today's webinar. It's one of 3 webinars that have been presented through the Changing Roles webinar series on their emerging issues. The Changing Roles is a U.S. Forest Service program dealing with forestry and natural resources in what we would call the urban-rural interface, or the wildland-urban interface. And this is the third in a series of webinars. The previous 2 webinars have been recorded and are posted on forestrywebinars.net. As well as today's webinar on succession planning. We'll have that recorded, and it'll be available on forestrywebinars.net for later viewing. The series was developed to provide natural resource professionals and others with information that can help them to work more effectively in the wildland-urban interface. Ideally, we're providing you with opportunities for you as participants for professional development in a convenient manner and at no cost. It's the whole idea of these webinars is to introduce you to a few of the concepts in a new Changing Roles model under development that will focus on these emerging issues. To learn more about the Changing Roles program, feel free to visit interfacesouth.org, Changing Roles, or email Annie Hermanson-Baez at ahermanson@fs.fed.us. You can also learn more about the Changing Role webinar series by visiting the website, or you can access the archived webinars on forestrywebinars.net. This whole webinar series is a collaboration of the University of Florida, the U.S. Forest Service, the Interface South, the Southern Group of State Foresters, Texas AgriLife Extension, and the Southern Region Extension Forestry. It is through this collaboration and partnership that this has been available to you at no cost. And with that, let me introduce today's speaker. Our speaker today is Chris Demers. He's going to be he's the Forest Stewardship Coordinator from the University of Florida School of Forest Resources and Conservation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
All right. Thank you, Bob. I first want to thank Nicole Wolf, formerly of the Changing Roles program, for inviting me to give a presentation today, and Annie Hermanson for her invitation as well and involvement with the Changing Roles program. Um, this My role at the University of Florida is I deliver and coordinate an educational program for landowners. Landowners are the primary audience of our outreach programs in the Forest Stewardship Program, but we also provide continuing education opportunities for natural resource professionals, forestry credits, and things of that nature. When I first got the invitation to give this presentation, it was my understanding that the Changing Roles program was primarily geared toward natural resource professionals. So the focus of this program, or I guess the target of this presentation, is to natural resource professionals. However, if you are a landowner, and I know there are some landowners out there, you will benefit from this presentation. I will be covering some of the steps of succession planning which will pertain to you. But most of the information in this presentation is really geared toward resource professionals and how they can get the ball rolling in this succession planning process. All right, let's get right into the definition of what succession planning is. And this term really didn't enter my vocabulary until around 2006. But succession planning, a relatively new term, is a process of setting up a smooth transition of property and management between the landowner and the future heirs, whether it be children or any other beneficiaries of the property. And the process is transparent. In other words, this process is communicated between the landowner and the heirs, and it's fair versus equitable. We're going to get into a little illustration of that concept right here. So we've got farm. Let's call this John and Mary Farms. John and Mary have 4 kids. Let's get to know these kids a little bit. John Jr. grows up. He gets involved with the farm. He likes to hunt. He likes to ride the tractor. He's interested in carrying on the farm legacy. Kathy, on the other hand, gets interested in other things. She moves away, becomes a college professor. Roy, also uninterested in the farm. He's the guy with the tattoos, hits the road with a touring band, and rarely, if ever, comes back to the farm. And then little Jake over there, he loves to hunt and fish, gets involved with the farm, and he's interested in carrying on the farm legacy. So based on that information, what might be considered a fair way for John and Mary to transition the farm to the children? And you can use your polling options there on the left to provide your answer. The 2 choices are A, all kids get the same share and control of the farm estate, or B, John Jr. and Jake get greater share and control of the farm estate than Kathy and Roy. So what would be a fair way to transition the farm to the next generation? If you want to go ahead and put your results in there, and I let Bob provide the results. Looks like we're getting a fairly even split between the what might be a fair way to transfer the farm. Let's take a look at what fair and equitable mean. Equitable means equal. All kids get the same share and control of the farm estate. So in that case, if all kids get the same control and share of the farm, a possible consequence, not necessarily what would happen, but given Kathy and Roy's interest elsewhere outside of the farm, they might be likely to sell their share, creating some problems for John Jr. and Jake, and the farm may or may not survive those types of changes. A fair way to transfer the farm would be to indeed give John Jr. and Jake some greater share and control of the farm estate, while Kathy and Roy acquire possibly some other heirlooms and values to help make it a fair deal regarding what they get, but or a more equitable option for what each children gets. But the fair way to handle this problem would possibly be to give John Jr. and Jake greater control. Kathy and Roy might squawk a little bit from not getting their share of the farm, but the farm management would most likely continue to be managed and passed on to the next generation. So getting back to our definition of what succession planning is, it's a formal process. We're going to get into that a little bit. It means it's legally binding. You're going to be using some legal tools in order to get the succession planning done. And it's thorough. It reasonably answers the who, what, where, when, and how questions related to the ownership management of the land into the future. So here's a question that comes up. Succession planning is the same thing as estate planning. Is that statement true or false? Looks like most have answered by now, and then I think y'all are on the right track. B, the answer is false. Succession planning is the process of preparing the family, the property, and management for a change in ownership. Estate planning really has to do with that formality of succession planning. It's a part of the succession planning process. Understanding and using the set of legal tools that are available to make sure your succession plan happens the way you want it to happen. And estate planning would include tools like wills, trusts, and business structures. And the estate planning part of this is a little bit beyond the scope of this particular presentation. So if you're hoping to get information on wills and trusts and business structures, I'm sorry to disappoint, but I'm not going to be getting into those too specifically in this webinar. But that is the distinction between succession planning and estate planning. So you still might ask, well, why not just focus on estate planning, since that's really where all the legal part of this is. And I think Clinton Bezins said it best. He said, talking about the tools before you have the plan is like packing your bags before you decide what kind of trip you want to take. Many families make the mistake of spending a lot of money on estate planning without ever having stepped back and asking exactly what they want to accomplish or how they want to move forward with the farm into the future without writing down their vision. There's some very basic steps that succession planning incorporates that estate planning may or may not. So it's always good to start at the beginning. Succession planning is the beginning of the process of thinking about the future of your land. So there's basically 5 things that can happen to a property. You can sell all or part to someone else. You can sell or donate the portion of the land use rights, i.e. through a conservation easement to an agency, organization, or charity. Break it up and divide amongst the children. Give intact to one child or one beneficiary. Give undivided interest in the property to the children or beneficiaries. And of course, there are benefits and risks to each of these actions, and they need to be thought through carefully to prevent unintended consequences. So at this point, some of you may be asking the question, is this really my business? Well, depending on who you are and what you do on a daily basis or who you work for, this may or may not be your business. However, if you think that estate planning, succession planning is not your business, I would say consider the reality that millions of acres of family-owned lands in the U.S. are going to be changing hands within the next decade. And many of these transfers will happen with virtually no planning. So it's important to have this in your considerations and in your day-to-day work with landowners, if you do work with landowners. So here's a question. You can poll your results. Nationwide, U.S. Forest Service projects that how many acres will pass out of forest use over the next 50 years? 725,000 acres, 1.7 million acres, 12.5 million acres, or 23.2 million acres. You can go ahead and put your best guess in there. Looks like most are thinking it's on the high end. All right, most of you are thinking it's somewhere in the middle of that range. And without having known the number, I would probably think it's in that range too, but surprisingly enough, it's projected that 23.2 million acres of forest land are going to pass out of forest use over the next 50 years. And many of these acres are going to be privately owned, non-industrial forest lands converted to some kind of residential or commercial use. So this is our business. We need to be thinking about the future of private lands, in addition to if we work for a government agency. We need to be thinking outside of our public land resources, because there's a lot of benefits that come out of private forest lands, as many of you know. So we do have some responsibility to, number one, ask some very simple, non-intrusive but important questions if you do interact with landowners. It's important to share some information and resources that are available. There's not a heck of a lot on this topic, but there are some very, very good ones out there. And also to think about inviting the next generation to get involved, particularly if you're out there providing any kind of outreach to landowners. I like to think about inviting the next generation. So we're going to be talking about some of these steps next. Also consider that the landowner cares about this too. If you feel like you're going to be prying by asking about the future of someone's land, think of it as you're doing them a favor potentially. They're probably not thinking about the future of their land beyond the next couple of years, maybe 5 years, and they may not be thinking about who the next owner is going to be and what happens to the land after they're gone. And they may want to start thinking about that. So some questions. These are just some casual questions if you're interacting with a landowner, if you're visiting them, if you're helping them with a management plan. I think it's important to determine if they have heirs. What's their status with kids? Do they have kids? And if they do have kids, are they interested in hunting? Does Jake Jr. over there, does he like to go fishing? Do you go fishing with your kids? Go hunting with your kids? Do they recreate on the property? The bottom line is we're trying to get at is how involved are the kids going to be after this landowner is gone, is out of the picture? Or is the next generation going to be involved with the management? And if there are no kids or kids are out of the picture, you want to start asking, especially if you're, and this is easier, of course, if you're involved with some kind of a management plan, or if you're helping them with a cost share program, you can ask, what's your long-term vision for this property? How do you see the land in 10, 20, 30, 50 or more years? If you don't have kids, depending on how comfortable you are with the land, or you can ask, are there other heirs or beneficiaries that might be interested? That kind of conversation might come after they are give you a little bit of information about their vision. And it all comes down to these two terms, conservation versus conversion. Are they comfortable with the property being converted to another use? And if they are, that's fine. Do they really want to see this land conserved into the future? And if they are, you can have that conversation. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples here of a couple of landowners that I know. I'm just going to use first names. First landowner, his name is George. George has a integrated pasture and timber operation, and it's beautiful. He's passionate about it. He's done a lot of work. He's basically spearheaded a production system that maximizes both forage and timber on his property. It's beautiful. The first thing George tells you when you visit his property is that one of the byproducts of a civil pasture operation is prime real estate, and George has decided that this farm someday is going to be prime real estate for his kids. There's going to be houses on it, and his kids are going to reap the benefits of the real estate market. And so with George, that's pretty much going to be the end of the conversation with George. That's the way he envisions the future of his property. That's all well and good with him and his family. That's where you're going to pretty much say, well, that's great. Best wishes to you and the family. Bob, on the other hand, is a landowner. Bob is really interested in longleaf pine restoration. And one of the first things that Bob tells you when you meet him is his planning horizon is 300 years. And he wants to slowly but surely restore that property to make it look like it may have before European settlement. So Bob may be the kind of person that you can have this kind of conversation with. He's interested in long-term conservation. You can start talking about, well, how can we make this happen? How do you think we can move forward with making this happen? Let's get your vision down. Let's move forward with that. So information and resources. Let's just get a show of hands of how many people have heard of this first resource that's up there. It's called Ties to the Land, Your Family Forest Heritage. How many have seen that? Just a show of hands. Show of hands. Looks like a bunch of you have. Great. Well, this is a really nice resource. It came out in 2006, and when this came out, that's really when the succession planning term. That's when I heard of it. Before that, I hadn't heard of succession planning. We'd been doing estate planning workshops, but we never really did much with succession planning, and really opened my eyes about how much more that you can do, how much more you can help landowners start thinking about the future of their property. There's a lot of steps in that succession planning process that I think that we might take for granted that are important. So this is a great book. It's the cost is about $25, but it's a great resource. There's worksheets in it. It really takes the landowner through the entire process of succession planning. By the time they get done using that resource, they will have in their hand a usable, workable succession plan that they can use to move forward with planning the future of their land. There's also a DVD that comes with it too, with video examples and everything. So I strongly recommend this to all landowners. If you own land, I strongly recommend pursuing that resource. The link is right there. Get your hands on that if you can. The states have some extension resource. I Google searched succession planning and didn't find a heck of a lot on it. One of the few was one that we did at the University of Florida called Ownership Succession Plan Now for the Future of Your Land, where I've basically boiled down the succession planning steps to 8 steps, and provided some resources, mainly the resource that you see at the top of the page there that ties to your land. There's a lot of resources on estate planning. I would suggest using resources that are available at that timbertax.org, National Timber Tax website. There's a lot of good resources there, and they're current. The tax laws are a changing thing, so it's a good idea to get your hands on the most current information, and timbertax.org has the current stuff. And depending on your state and what's going on there with extension and the agencies, there may or may not be some workshops on this topic. I know in Florida we cooperate with different people to put on workshops on estate planning for landowners, and we make these kinds of programs available. So in your state there may be some offerings, and I would suggest if you do interact with landowners, get familiar with what's going on in your state workshop-wise, what's going on with outreach, and share that information with landowners. I'm going to go through the steps of succession planning. This will especially make a lot of sense to you if you're a landowner, and if you're not, then this is kind of what's involved with the whole succession planning process. The first step is getting down on paper what your vision and goals are for the land. What is your vision? How do you value your land? Is it simply an asset, or is it something that you want to see managed into the future? Is it a legacy? Some of you have probably heard of this heirloom scale. If you've heard of that ties to your land, you've certainly heard of this heirloom scale, where on the left side there you see some money. That's the asset value. This land is purely an investment. I'm going to be passing this on as an asset. It's going to generate funds, and that's pretty much it. There's not much other value that I have in it or see in it. That's kind of the George example to some extent. And on the right, we kind of have the Bob example. He sees the land as something to be carried on into the future. He wants it to be a ecosystem, functioning ecosystem, or a functioning farm for as long as he can think of, 300 years. So that's that inherent value of the land. So where do you fall on the heirloom scale? It's important to get identified exactly where you are on that scale. I think most landowners probably fall somewhere in the middle. But it's important to have that down on paper. What's your vision? What's your long-term goals? And once you have those goals, you want to communicate that with the family. That's where you get the rest of your family at the table, and you get out that heirloom scale, and you say, well, this is where I am on the heirloom scale. I'm a 6 or a 7. How about y'all? Where do you land on that heirloom scale? And this is going to be one of the more challenging steps in the process, because it involves family members' emotions, relationships with each other, relationships with the land, sibling relations. You're going to be getting into the concepts of death, aging, parent-child relationships. All kinds of things could come up in this, and it's going to be a process of discovery. You're going to learn some things that you didn't know about your children, about their relationships to the land. So this is an important, probably a more challenging part of the process. At some point, you may or may not, depending on how involved your business, your forest business is, or your natural resource or farm business is, create some kind of a business structure, and that's going to define how the business is conducted, how you're taxed, how much liability you and your partners bear. And of course, the best structure will depend on how large and complicated the business is. I'm not going to get into the details. If we have time at the end, if you have specific questions about these structures: sole proprietorship, general partnership, family limited partnership, limited liability corporation, S corporation, C corporation. These all vary in how they're set up and how they are taxed. It's a bit beyond the scope of this particular presentation to get into those specifics. That's more on the estate planning end of things. So here's where you want to decide who's going to be carrying on the management, who's going to be taking on this legacy. And if you think back to our John and Mary farm example, you had John Jr. and Kathy, Roy, and Jake. Which of those children are going to be the most likely successors to manage the family business, the family farm, the family forest? It's essential that they number one, be interested in if not passionate about the land and its management, and that they have regained the acceptance of the rest of the family. And with that successor, you're going to use consistent patterns for decision making. You're going to train the successors to do the same so that they will carry on that process, so that when you're out of the picture, you have set a precedent of how decisions are made, how the business is conducted. So you're setting up a pattern of management and planning to your heirs. That's an important part if you've got kids. It's going to be important to have regular meetings, talk about things regularly, develop an agenda, make it formal to some extent, make sure everyone's engaged, disclose any conflicts of interest that there are, explain how decisions are going to be made. So it's important to do this so that the family understands the business structure and how the farm is operating. And also use this as an opportunity to continue sharing your visions and your passions for the land. Write down important decisions. It's important to get everything documented in writing. Some things to write down, and this can be these kinds of things would be possibly in your management plan. Your management plan is good for about 5 years. When you update your management plan, what are the objectives? Who's going to be responsible for regular management and how much oversight that person will have from the rest of the family? What age does the next generation qualify for ownership? Under what conditions will the property or assets be sold? And will you allow the property to be mortgaged? This is all things that you want to have written down and discussed and decided for the next generation so that they can carry on your vision or legacy. And if you're hiring the family, make sure that you've got employment policies set out before you hire anybody. Follow the employment laws for your state. Make these decisions before the work begins. How will they be paid? What are the expectations? Who's eligible for work? Is there any kind of special training? Does John Jr. need to go to forestry school to learn how to manage a family farm? This is an important one, and I think a lot of landowners are doing this. I think the best way to encourage a legacy is to really enjoy the land and do that with your family. Set up a camping area, go hiking, go fishing, go hunting with your kids if you hunt. This bottom one is one that I'm involved with our stewardship program. We do tours for landowners on properties, and the host landowner, I think, gets maybe as much out of it as the landowners that come to the tour to learn about land management. The host landowner gets inspired. They see they're seeing their property through other people's eyes, and that can be really motivating, really encouraging. We had one tour where the family, the whole family got involved with the tour, and the kids were involved with giving presentations at some of the stops. And they had written out on a piece of paper exactly what they were going to say. They got really into it. So it was exciting to see that family get excited about seeing their property through someone else's eyes. And these are some important things that you can do to showcase your farm and kind of renew your passion about your farm or your land. All right, this is the third step in the whole process of what we can do. We talked about asking questions to the landowner. We talked about some of the resources that are available. This is that last thing in that list, which is invite the next generation. If you're offering an educational event for landowners, encourage them to bring their kids, especially if it's appropriate for kids. Older kids, if it's technical information, if you're going to be talking about taxes and really silvicultural concepts, biological concepts, the kids are going to have to be older for something like that. But if you're doing a tour, a farm tour, everybody loves a hayride. So these are the kinds of things that you can invite kids to. We did a tour at a farm where they had some chickens, and this little guy had a blast playing with the chickens and feeding the chickens. And kids love to do hay rides and go around on a farm, and they can pick up some information too. You know, they may be small, they may be young, but they're picking up information too, and they're picking up on your passion too, on your interest and your visions. So kind of run down the major points of what I went over today. If you're a natural resource professional that interacts with landowners, you can get the succession planning ball rolling by asking some very simple, non-intrusive, but important questions about the future of the land, about the kids, about what their vision is. So don't be afraid to have that conversation, and I think you'll know when you've gone too far. And then share some information and resources. There's a lot of things out there available for landowners. That one that I pointed out, that's right there at the bottom, ties to the land. I strongly recommend, even if you're not a landowner, to get your hands on that and get familiar with the succession planning process, because it is important. And invite the next generation. Get the kids involved with the program. Well, I'm ending, I guess, about 10 minutes or so early, so I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions or discussion. If y'all have questions about any of those business structures that we talked about or anything like that, we can open it up right here.
So if you have any questions for Chris, please type them into the chat window and we'll try to work through them. So Chris, some folks might be getting ready to type in some questions. I do have a question about the different types of businesses. What's the difference between a family limited liability and a LLC, I think was the other one?
Yeah. So a family limited partnership is a partnership made up of family members. One or more general partners have personal liability for the debts of the business and operate the business for the benefit of the limited partners. The limited partners are investors in the business, are not active in management, and have no liability for the debts of the partnership. And it's taxed the same as a general partnership, which is the partnership pays no tax, but it files a tax return to report the income or loss of the business. And the partners report their respective share of the partnership income on their individual tax returns.
Wow, quite complicated. So,
and then a limited liability company is it's a new business structure that combines the best features of corporations and partnerships, and the owners are called members.
So, are they considered investors, such as in the other part, in the family partnership one?
Yeah, all members have the liability protection of a corporation but are taxed as a partnership. And the agreements have wide flexibility in how they're drafted, giving families the ability to craft special provisions that will protect the property and create a management structure.
Okay. So here's a question that's come in from Jake. You mentioned business. You think business structure is always better than investments?
I'd say it depends on the particular situation, and how, of course, the decision how you set up that, how you do business out of your forest, whether it is a business investment or a hobby, defines how you pay taxes as well. So those kinds of things need to be decided at the start. You know, ideally before any timber is sold or any kind of operations like that.
Okay. Here's one from Al. He's wanting your thoughts on this process for foresters managing TIMO property.
TIMOs, that's interesting. That's a very good question. I mean, a TIMO, or for those that don't know what a TIMO is, that's a timber investment management organization. That's really an investment company that's set up. It manages land, and I think that this process of succession planning is really for non-industrial family forest owners. That's who this process was really defined for. I think in an organization like a TIMO or industrial landowner or a REIT, for that matter, real estate investment trust, I think they're going to have a more specific process that's built in to their organization that's going to talk about the future of how their holdings are carried on and managed into the future.
Okay, thank you. So here's one from Heather. She's wondering, is an LLP a cooperative?
LLP. Does she mean LLC?
I don't know, but I would. I think it's limited liability partnership, but she is wondering if that's more like a cooperative.
It is the main part about the family limited partnership is that the general partners, or in this case, if it was a family, the parents are going to have the liability for the debts of the business, and they're going to operate the business. The limited partners, in this case, if it's a family, the kids are going to be the limited partners who are not necessarily active and are not making active decisions at this time, but have no debts or have no liability for debts yet, but at some point will. I'd hesitate to call it a cooperative, but I think that you could set up some sort of a limited partnership where you have members, your general partners within a cooperative that are making decisions, and then limited partners who are not liable for debts of the partnership.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does to me. So, and Heather, feel free to chime in if that didn't make sense to you, or if you want to restructure that question. So Daniel's asking, are there any other tips to help negotiate equitable division of assets with non-interested family members without bankrupting management of the farm?
That's a great question, and that's I kind of gave a non-specific example of that sort of thing with that John and Mary scenario where we talked about the kids and what they might get. But I don't have a good answer for that. I think that kind of thing is really going to be family specific. I don't know that there is a boilerplate answer to a question like that, where you have families are all very individual entities, and each one is going to need to have their own specific path to take. I think that if you are going to have, inequitable share and control amongst the kids, you need to compensate that somehow through other values, whether that be other real estate or other heirlooms or other kinds of values, stocks. That really depends on the family situation. But I think there are strategies that you can come up with creatively, and those would be addressed through an estate tax planning advisor. Any other questions? Oh, the Women in Their Woods 4-day retreat offered by the Penn State Co-op. That sounds like a great opportunity. Did my headset get done? Yeah, right. Hopefully it's done. All right.
So I'm back, Chris. Sorry, my headset went dead.
Oh, okay. I thought that was okay.
No,
good.
that was my headset. Other headset went dead.
Oh, it was your headset. I thought it was mine.
So
all right. That was
did
great.
you? So I assumed we left off at about the other tips for negotiating, or did you move on to the next question?
Right. Yeah, that was where I left off. I answered that question about other tips for negotiating. It's basically going to be very family specific, and those kinds of decisions can be discussed with a estate planning advisor.
Okay, so here's a question: could LLC member units be set up so transfer would be fair and equitable to all 4 children to share in proceeds, with John and Jake having management responsibilities and compensation for their efforts?
It's a great idea. And I think that would be a viable approach that could be set up through this business structure. That's another advantage of these business structures, is that you can not only set up how the business is run now, but how it's going to be run in the future and who gets what in the future. So that's a great way to approach that question.
Okay, and then Michael's wondering, of all these categories of ownership, which best limits tax liability, or is that beyond the discussion?
Well, I'd say that's probably a little bit beyond the discussion. It's really going to depend on the situation. I'm not sure I could give an answer that's going to cover every circumstance. So I'm going to defer that to the beyond the scope of this presentation.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. I think that's it for questions. Does anybody else have any questions? Please add them into the chat window. I'm going to send out the URL for the evaluation and quiz at the end of today's session. Keep in mind that even if you're not doing the session for continuing education credits, we ask that you at least complete the evaluation portion of the webinar so that we have that feedback so we can improve our service as we move forward. And so I'm going to push it out 2 ways. One, I'm going to put the link inside the chat window, but I'm also going to push it out through Collaborate, which will open up the browser for you to go directly to that URL. Keep in mind, though, it may take a minute or so for that website to launch on your computer and for the page to come up, so be patient. So I've pushed it out. Your browser should have opened up on top of your Collaborate session. If it didn't, it may be behind it. But give it a second and see if that page comes up. And if it did, you should be able to go through and complete the evaluation. And at the end of the evaluation, if you did not request continuing education credits, you'll be directed to the completion of the survey and you'll be done. If you did ask for continuing education credits. Once you complete the evaluation, it will direct you to the quiz and then the form that you need to fill out in order for us to send you your certificate. At this time, I'd like to thank Chris for all that he's done in putting today's topic together. I do find it a very interesting topic and realize that for many landowners, as they move forward, it's amazing how many of them have not thought about succession planning and often call and talk about estate planning. If you got a message that says you were only in the session 48 minutes, that means that you did not join soon enough to earn your continuing education credits. You would have had to join the session at noon. In order to get those continuing education credits, you have to participate in the full session.